Thank you to everybody for joining this evening and for your continued support of the ERC. We like to get a good number of these webinars on to fulfill our charitable aims of promoting economic education, so we do appreciate your attendance. Before we begin, I'd just like to talk a bit about the next event that we have coming up. We'll be joined by Glenn Hubbard, who's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary at the US Treasury Department. That will be online at the 3rd of April, and registration's open via our website. For today's event now, we're very lucky to be joined by 3 speakers today. Firstly, Thierry Rossier, and he's a senior researcher at the University of Fribourg and postdoctoral researcher in sociology at the London School of Economics. Hello, Thierry. We're also joined by Jens Maesse. He's a research associate at the University of Gießen, and Stephen Pühringer, who's deputy head of the Institute of Comprehensive Analysis of Economy at the University of Linz and a research fellow at the Institute of Economics at the Cassanus University in Germany. Together, along with Pierre Benz, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it today, they're the editors of a really fascinating book entitled The Power and Influence of Economists. And this essentially analyzes the manner in which economists and the economics profession as a whole has managed to exert so much influence over so many spheres of our life. And for today's talk, we'll have a 30-minute talk initially, followed by a 30-minute question and answer session. Feel free as we're going along to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions that you might have, and we'll generally gather those at the end of the talk. Okay, so without any further ado, then I'll hand over to our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So first, let us thank the Economic Research Council for inviting us. It's an honor and a pleasure to be able to talk today about our book. So this is the book. As you can see, it's not very thick, but still. So our book for the people who are interested is available online in full open access. So that means that you can freely download the book on the publisher's website on Taylor and Francis. So the book is a collection of 14 chapters. And we edited and coordinated these chapters that were authored by 16 authors from 9 countries, mostly from Europe, but we had also one contributor who was at the time in the US, one in Brazil, and one in Turkey. So if you are interested in the book, don't hesitate to download it. It's completely free. It's open access. So we started with this book with the idea that we wanted to the power of economists in society, and we started by seeing that economists are actually powerful, well, in academia, of course, where they occupy influential positions. They also are influential in science, and they are a social science leaning towards mathematical or natural sciences, and they are also experts, consultants, for the state or for business, and they have some visibility in the media as well. So the idea is that now I will let my colleagues talk about some parts, and then we will develop different perspectives that were presented in the book. So I'll let my colleagues talk, and don't hesitate to let me know when I should advance with the slides.
Now.
Should I go now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. Of course, this was one aspect to see that economists are involved in very different social contexts and institutional constellations between academia and society, and another background and And a starting point for the book was to see that different forms of power and influence are at work here. In the social sciences, we generally distinguish between, let's say, soft forms of power and so-called hard forms of power. Hard forms of power are forms of power which construct stratifications along social relations. So, or the other way around, construct social relations as stratifications. And here, one author is very typical for this kind of hard power. This is Pierre Bourdieu's sociology. And according to Bourdieu, one distinguishes between economics, social, cultural, and other forms of capital, forming social hierarchies and constituting social fields. And in our book, we have different contributions using Bourdieu's approach to power in different ways, also looking at political capital, academic capital, and so on. Yeah? But on the other hand, there is another form of power or understanding of power. These are so-called soft forms of power. And soft forms of power are not constructing immediately hierarchies. They are basically strategies of normalization, disciplinization, and self-management. And these soft forms of power apply mainly discursive means such as statistics, specific forms of language use, specific arguments, so different discursive aspects are normally related to these kinds of soft forms of power. And according to Foucault, power can be seen as a biopolitical production of social life. So it is not about hierarchies and exclusions. It is more about the production of things. Now, Stefan.
Okay, so yeah, next slide, thanks. So our approach in this book is somehow to give a first introduction or an overview of what we call social studies of economics. So we understand this broad transdisciplinary approach ranging from sociology, from political science, but also from a critical stance in heterodox economics itself as a new form of evolving field of social studies of economics, where we are interested in the diverse and widespread forms of how economic reasoning and economics are able to perform power, to have impact on society, politics, but also within the academic field. So we follow a very broad definition of economic reasoning, somehow can be understood as basic beliefs on how the economy works. So this is what we broadly understand as economic reasoning. And our approach of social studies of economics is influenced by different traditions in critical cultural political economy, Bob Chesop, critical policy studies, science and technology studies, and economic sociology. And our book now is somehow or the main aim of our book is to bring together these different traditions within the social sciences. Within our approach of social studies of economics, we more or less apply four main analytical frameworks, four main analytical ways of methodologies and theoretical approaches within the social sciences. And we have these four more or less important parts in our book as well, and we try to bring together these different contributions. The first one is a discourse analytical approach, more or less originating in sociology, where we are interested in expert discourses of power, the role of economic experts in media discourses, in public discourses, but also in political discourses. A second strand is more related to governmentality studies, and especially Foucault, where we study the performative impact of economic reasoning, broad definition of economic reasoning, on expertise and economic expertise, on how this is able to impact on society and politics. We have a third position where we are interested in personal institutional networks. Economists are involved as actors between media, academia, politics, and society, and we try to provide these personal and institutional network analytical perspective. And the fourth analytical approach in social studies of economics is field analysis. Economics is considered as being a field, as a social field with a close relation to the field of power. Yeah, and the main aim of our book is somehow to bring together these four analytical stances and to provide a common framework to how them for these approaches to develop further. And we will now come to specific forms and contributions in our book. I'll hand over again to Jens.
Yeah, to me. Yes, the first analytical perspective, and I took them together, is discourse approaches and governmentality approaches. And in this perspective, which are perspectives which are very close related to each other, we are interested in the way how knowledge or economic expertise is produced in different social fields, for example, in universities, but also in think tanks and in administrations. We are interested in the way how knowledge, images, generally science and language coming from economists is circulating in different social worlds, for example, through social media, through books and papers, through speeches and media reports, through reports and expertise. So there are different ways how knowledge can circulate and enter into different contexts. And then we are, of course, we're interested in the way how this discourses influence other people and especially other professional people. So we are very much interested in the way how professions work. And of course, if we talk about professions, different kinds of professions, then we always need to talk about the lay people. And research questions in discourse analysis and governmentality studies are, first of all, argumentation analysis. So we are looking for argumentation styles, so-called topoi or frames. And here in this vein, Beuerle's contribution in our book is a good example, where Beuerle is analyzing the role of economics textbooks for shaping the mind and the identity of students in universities. Another research approach in discourse studies is position takings, and here we are interested how through different markers such as deixis or polyphony, speaker positions are constructed, and how these speaker positions form influential positions to define a reality in a specific way, and also to present themselves and see the other in a specific way. And here's my own paper, Maesse, in the book is an example for this kind of discourse analysis. A third form is so-called performativity studies, which are interested in structural translations and normalizations via knowledge. And here, I think Gerardo Nicoletta's paper is interesting. Gerardo is analyzing how South Italian so-called pre-industrial rurality is governed and constructed through economic expertise, and how pictures of backwardness and development are formed while experts use economics language as a lens to understand reality and to form reality. And this has a kind of self-fulfilling effect. And fourth perspective is the way how legitimacy is constructed via discourses, especially through norms and values. And I think the paper by Elena Psylakou is interesting. Elena shows how neoliberal ideas basically control and influence people, not via ideologies or via concepts or via beliefs, other through hidden through advertising via emotions. So Elena shows how emotions basically construct a kind of new reality for people in times of crisis. Thierry? Yes, and I just give you a very, very quick example that you can understand what we do here. This is an example from the Brexit discourse from a paper by Thierry and myself. And here we analyze, basically we look at formulations. This is a letter from Economists for Free Trade. And here we basically look at how professional groups construct a speaker position. In this way, in this example, by constructing an antagonistic opposition to EU, whatever EU is, but also by strategies of self-victimization. And these two strategies are basically a very prominent way how economists from this Economists for Free Trade group take a position in public, but also in semi-professional discourse. And now we can go on with to Stefan.
Okay, so the third main perspective is, as we mentioned before, a network perspective, social network analysis. And here we differentiate between two approaches in how power of economists can be approached by network analysis. So on the one hand, there is more or less a focus on the inner academic or inside academia structure of networks within academia, and there we focus on the economics discipline, and the other perspective is this network analysis outside academia. So if we focus on inside academia, economics has been studied, and many studies have shown that economics occupies a very powerful position, a very special position within the social sciences. So economics is far ignorant towards findings and empirics and methods of other social sciences. There have been some studies, especially by Marion Foucault, with the title "The Superiority of Economics," or the economics as the queen of social sciences. So where we find a very insularity position of economics within the social sciences with very strong hierarchies, which then also lead to a marginalization of other approaches within the social sciences inside the field of economics. We find stronger inner hierarchies within economics, so we have a very strong power of those forms of knowledge production in economics which are related to top economic journals. So we for instance, we find that publishing in a top economic journal is really a very important way to have any chance of getting along as being a professional economist. And we also find, and especially in the UK, there have been some studies which find that these very strong inner hierarchies also lead to a marginalization of pluralist and heterodox economic approaches, simply because of these quantified research evaluation schemes, which are very much focused on these top publications in a few prestigious journals in economics. So network studies which try to approach this inside academia logic, power logic in economics, focus, for instance, on citation networks and co-authorship networks, but also on concentration dynamics in economics. And the second perspective is that some economists or distinct groups of economists really have close links to powerful networks between academia, politics, business, and media, and their economists and the economic imaginaries, the economic reasoning really has a performative impact on society and on politics. And in this field of where we study political and societal power of economics, we, for instance, analyze discourse and power coalitions of economics, especially also think tank networks, where economists really try to approach this economic field and this field of economic powerful interests. But economists also serve as we called it, public intellectuals. Maybe the next slide, please, Thierry.
Just trying to. Yes, is it the good one?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, in our book we have 3 examples, and I will jump in in the first one with a specific focus afterwards. So we have more or less 3 contributions who try to approach to apply this network analytical perspective on power and economists. In the first paper, Who Are the Economy Germany Listens To, we have a focus on especially influential economists in Germany, and we try to rebuild and reconstruct the social structure of influential economists using a network perspective. So there we try to highlight ideological and political power balances between influential German economists. In a second contribution, Gauthier Morin tries to the paper is entitled Global Production Circulation of Dominant Ideologies, Mexico from the Default Debt Crisis to the Brady Plane. There she tries to get a better understanding of power of economic ideas and expert networks, power networks between private banks, international organizations, multinational corporations, and also individual economic experts, and how these interlinkages between these networks of power were then able to really push forward an agenda of financial deregulation in Mexico. And we have a third perspective, which is mainly focused on the public debate on wealth taxation and inheritance taxation in Germany and the German press. And there, Hendrik Theine tries to also use this and apply this network perspective to show discourse coalitions, which show then that conservative and neoliberal economists are very strong, overrepresented in public economic debates in Germany. And this also serves as kind of these economists as organic intellectuals who then support low wealth taxes and inheritance taxes in German media. Yeah, and I will provide you one image, a figure of a social network perspective, where we try to focus on this group of influential economists in Germany. In Germany, there's a ranking of influential economists where they separate three different forms of influence: political influence, media influence, and academic influence. And then the title of this ranking is these are the economists Germany listens to. So if you are on the top of this ranking, you are the most influential economist in Germany. And what we do here is we build a two-mode network of two different nodes. So the one node is a personal node. These are the dots in this network. And then we have different forms of triangles and circles. These are institutions. And what we do here is we build these two-mode networks of persons and institutions, and then try to show how these different networks are interlinked and what power structures and discourse coalitions we find in these networks. So by institutional nodes, we understand, for instance, think tanks. We understand the support for economist petitions. We also understand the economic research institutes as very interesting hubs of economists. And then we try to build this network. So if you are close to each other, you are part of the same think tank. We understand this as a proxy for ideological proximity. And what we build here is then we find on the one hand, we find a severe underrepresentation of female economists. This is not only true for Germany. This is really an overall phenomenon in the economics discipline, where we have about 4 or 5% of female economists in this overall population of influential economists in Germany. And this is really, compared to any other social science, a very, very strong male domination within economics. But what we also find here is that, and maybe you won't be able to read the titles, but you can see the colors at least. So we find a strong mainstream. These are the blue circles and blue triangles in the middle. And then on the bottom, we find a green network, and this green network is more or less composed out of neoliberal think tanks, advocacy think tanks, the Montpellier Society, for instance, but also German-based neoliberal think tanks. So what we find here is that within this group of influential German economists, we really have a strong overrepresentation of, on the one side, the mainstream, but on the other hand, also these ordoliberal, neoliberal power circles within Germany. And we find on the upper side, we find these red triangles and circles, and these are more or less progressive, heterodox Keynesian economists. But we have really this very strong overrepresentation or strong dominance of neoliberal networks within influential economists in Germany.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. So I am going to present the third analytical perspective. Which is basically fields. So the notion of field or the concept of field has been developed by amongst other Pierre Bourdieu, who was mentioned before. So a field, basically, in this sense, with to keep in mind, it's an analogy to the physical sciences. So fields, in Bourdieu's sense, are forces fields, but applied to the social world and to the social life. So in this sense, fields are autonomous spaces, and they can consist in, for example, professional groups, but with clear boundaries, borders, and a specific stake within it. So people will basically, people who are involved within the field will basically compete for a stake. And in the case of economists, we can really speak about a field of economics. And in this field, economists compete for, well, first they compete for capitals, resources, assets within the field, and those resources grant to them some positions, some spatial positions, so relational positions. You have to keep in, you have to take, you have to imagine those economists who compete against each other, but at the same time, they are relationally situated within what we could map as a two-dimensional graph. And based on these positions within the field, they take specific political and scientific position takings. And economists will always also compete for the definition and redefinition of what economics is, and what good economics is, and what not so good economics is. And by constantly competing for these stakes, they also compete for the definition and redefinition of the borders, of the boundaries outside the field. And two particular features of the field of economics is, the first one would be that maybe compared to other sciences, and especially other social sciences, it is not very polycentric. So, and it is subject to transnational processes of recognition, and this builds a hierarchy within the discipline. And at the helm of this hierarchy, there are only a few US departments, a few US journals, and also the well-known so-called Nobel Prize in economics. And another feature of this field is that economists are among the most important producers of economic devices, of economic tools, of expertise to govern society. And in that sense, they are heard by the state. They are close to the state, and they are close to companies. So basically, when we proceed to a field analytical strategy on the economics profession, we ask three main questions. The first one would be, where is the economic profession located in relation to other social powers? So where is it situated in relation to the state, in relation to companies, in relation to the media, etc. And then a second question, we would zoom in within the discipline of economics, and we would ask, what is the specific distribution of resources? How are distributed professional trajectories and careers and networks? And then we would ask also, what would be the specific stake among economists? And finally, a third question would be, which are the particular practices, which are the cognitive, moral dispositions of individuals, and which position takings take place among economists. So for this perspective, we had at least 3 papers within the book. So the first one was about the institutionalized pathways to the Nobel Prize in economics. So it's an example I will give you right away. I will talk a little bit more about this paper. Another one was about the networks of the Swiss professors, the Swiss university professors in economics, and this paper was written by myself and my colleague Pierre Benz. And the third one was about the international circulation of economists close to the state in Brazil. So give you a little example on on the papers. So Philip Coram, who wrote the paper about the Nobel Prize in economics, and he collected a biographical database on all economics Nobel Prize laureates between 1969 and 2018. And I mean, the main result of that paper was that those people do not come from random places. So we could argue that there is no real talent or merit in getting a Nobel Prize, if I want to be a bit polemical to some extent. So because first of all, those people publish a lot in the top 5 journals of the profession. So American Economic Review, Econometrica, Journal of Political Economy, Quarterly Journal of Economics, and the Review of Economic Studies. And those 5 journals are mainly based in the US. And some of them are close to some top departments in the US. And then they had a career towards professorial tenure at top departments, and again in the US. And especially they were very close to what Coram calls in this book the top 5 departments. So basically Harvard, MIT, Chicago, Stanford, and Princeton. And they also kind of did their PhD in those departments, and they were also quite a lot students of each other's. And if they were not professors at those departments, they also had some visiting stays at those departments. And basically, if you have not done such visiting stays, if you are not tenured at those departments, if you have not published a lot in those journals, basically you will never get a Nobel Prize in economics. So that was one of the results in our book. And well, just to be very quick, I wanted to show you this is kind of the standard method that you would use, the standard quantitative method that you would use to do a field analysis. So this is called multiple correspondence analysis. And this is basically factor analysis for categorical data. And in this analysis, we mapped the economics professors in Switzerland during 20 years, and we were able to show, I won't go into details, but we were able to show that within the profession, the external criteria, so basically the having or not an external position, so close to the state and the companies, in the field of Swiss economics is way more important than what we can call internal criteria. So basically scientific recognition, having a lot of scientific awards and prizes and citations and scientific recognition basically is kind of less important. So now we can conclude actually.
Okay, yeah, conclude and maybe just give an overview of our next steps in our project. So we formed a network called Power and Economics a few years ago. And what our main idea was, and what this book also tries to show, is that economics is really on the one hand very strongly dominated by one paradigm, by neoclassical economics, with a more or less political translation into neoliberalism in many aspects. And economics really has this very strong form of power within academia, especially within the social sciences, but also has a performative impact on politics and society, on media debates, on how people think about the economy, and basic imaginaries about how the economy works, how the relation between economy and society is constructed. And what we try to do in our project or in our research network is really develop this idea further. So social studies of economics is really a rapidly evolving field. We founded this network. We have regular workshops more or less every year. So we had one in Naples 2 years ago on the role of economic expertise in crisis-prone societies. So the impact of economic reasoning in a very specific event of economic crisis. We had a workshop in Austria last year about rankings and the structure of economic science. So really this approach of a very strong dominance of quantitative evaluation matrices within economics, and how this also performs the way economic knowledge is produced and then again transformed or translated into society and political advice. And we will have a further workshop in Lisbon this year about value and valuation challenges in political economy analysis. Yeah, so we really are very at the edge of this project and of this research agenda, and we try to push it forward. And I think the main contribution really is this interdisciplinary approach of studying power, a very powerful discipline, but not only within academia, but also trying to get a better impression, a better understanding of how this way of how economic knowledge is produced then also translate into society and politics. Okay, so thank you for your attention. It's quite funny that we don't see you, but you see us. But we're not able to make it in person. But we are looking forward to any kind of comments, questions whatsoever.
Amazing. Thank you very much, guys. That's such an insightful and thought-provoking talk on how economics and economists exert their influence. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. So we'll open up the floor to questions. Feel free to type any questions that you have into the Q&A section, and we can manage that from there. In the meantime, while you are getting your questions ready, I think I'll go ahead with one first, if you don't mind. So you talked about economics as the queen of the social science in your discussion there. And I was just kind of wondering a little bit about how we've gotten to that point. How has economics become the queen of the social science, and how has neoclassical economics as well kind of overshadowed other heterodox ideas?
Stefan, do you want to go with that question? Maybe it's your expertise, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, thanks. I think this is really an excellent question, and it's not very easy to answer, as you can imagine. I think one idea which you mentioned is really this rather close relation between neoclassical economics in its foundation and the field of power or neoliberal ideology. So on the one hand, economic knowledge is really producing powerful knowledge. It's producing hegemonic knowledge about how capitalist economies work. So we really have a very strong relation between the formation of monoparadigmatic science within economics, centered around neoclassical paradigm, and really a neoliberalization of our society. So somehow economic knowledge produces the knowledge a capitalist society needs to reassure itself, and so to say, to some extent, this way of economic knowledge also provides a useful tool and device for capitalist interests.
Can I say something on the other part of the question? Why it is seen as the queen? This was your formulation, David. Yeah, I wouldn't call it. I think so. I personally wouldn't call it the queen. I would. This is an image which economists produce about themselves and the discipline. Yeah, it is indeed. It's interesting. I'm a sociologist. I'm interested in the way why such an image can be produced without critically questioning it. I would talk about a predominance of economic thinking among other social sciences, not compared to natural sciences, engineering, and other fields, which are much more influential than any social sciences in society. Yes, of course, via the economy, of course. And I think within the social sciences and cultural sciences, I think economics or economic thinking takes a particular predominant position because it is very closely related to the state, and the nation state as we know today, as it developed especially in the 20th century, not in the 19th century, but in the 20th century, became a scientific state. A state based on numbers, based on calculations, based on representations, based on specific forms of governance. Look at all ministries; they all somehow use economic numbers. And on this, through this state role of economics, economic thinking has basically a feedback effect to the academic field. So when your products are regularly used by non-professionals or by professionals from other fields, like politicians, for example, or administrations, also managers, then there is a symbolic response effect to the academic field, because now academic field is under control of society and no longer autonomous. Therefore, I would never talk about, say, that economics is an autonomous field. It is the most heteronomous field among the social sciences, because they cannot control what they produce. Others control it via the demand effect of society. And I think this is also the reason why excellence and the idea of top economists and so on, Nobel Prizes. There's no Nobel Prize for sociology, for example. Even I think such superiority-related images can be or must be produced in order to speak to lay people. To speak to lay people, say we make excellent research here. We have even five top journals. And this is basically explains why our colleagues outside academia can solve societal problems. If they can or not doesn't matter. It is basically a symbolic power game. And I think this is a very important aspect why economics is seen by themselves and by some other people as the queen of social sciences, if you like.
Very interesting. Just on that point, actually, if you don't mind, I think you mentioned something quite similar to the idea that with economics and people using economics not being that well versed in the ideas that come about from them, do you think some element then of kind of more widespread education in economics can almost reduce the kind of power and influence that it has in a way? If that makes sense.
It's an interesting question. I don't know if somebody else wants to respond to this question. I think there are many translations taking place between academic economics and applied economics in the political field, for example. And finally, politicians decide what to do. And they don't listen always to even especially to prominent economists, they don't really listen. Sometimes they do if they are useful for them. And I think economic education is, of course, it is the way, I think, to include more people in a debate which people don't understand. Basically, they don't even know what they are talking about sometimes when we talk about growth or inflation or unemployment. Or kind of unemployment people understand, but inflation is a big thing. Where does inflation come from? And what is inflation? So people follow these debates in the public sphere, in the public media, but they don't really understand the background about how inflation is developing, what can be done, what cannot be done, and so on. And so I think this is, of course, very important. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Kind of relating to some of the stuff that we've talked about there, for any of you then, do you think that there's a potential danger with regards to this power that economics hold? And I think the economists hold, sorry, and I think we've touched upon bits of that already. Yeah.
Maybe if I try to answer quickly, and maybe my colleagues can help. I think the danger, in the sense, it's not the power that economists hold by themselves, but maybe it's the absence of plurality, or the absence of different perspectives within economics of the people who hold this power, because often there is not a lot of different diverging views among the experts, or at least on some topics. So the danger is there. So it's not only that economists own more than other social sciences or other sciences to some extent on certain economic topics, but also that only a fraction of some economists are detaining this, are owning this power, actually. Yeah. And I don't know if my colleagues want to add something.
Yeah, maybe. I think you're completely right. So this very paradigmatic status quo of economics is maybe the problem, not individual economists or what kind of power they hold. And I think one very illuminating example, and maybe this also touches upon some other questions, is that rather on this idea of what topics do economists do research on. So what is the ontological basis of economic research? What are we looking? What are the interesting questions in the economics discipline? And there were some recent studies focusing on the role of ecological issues in economics. And we saw now in this presentation as well that economics really has a very strong bias towards these top 5 publications, so these top 5 journals. And these studies found that, for instance, concerning climate change, climate crisis, there were more or less no publications in these top 5 journals. So there were, in a time range of 20 years, there were a number of 15 publications somehow touching upon this issue of ecological crisis. So maybe this is also a good way of looking at things, or maybe also gives hope, because if economics really is not able to answer any relevant question for the organization of 21st century societies, maybe the economics just will lose its power. But on the other hand, there are very strong institutional power structures which won't diminish, because they do not touch upon issues like ecological issues. But I think this question of what do economists do research on, and especially what do they don't touch upon on relevant topics. So this question of relevance versus excellence is really an important one. And there I think is also hope for pluralist paradigms, for other disciplines within the social sciences, which are much more able and capable to answer questions which really are at the forefront of challenges for 21st century societies.
No, absolutely, I completely agree with you there. And I think this leads very well on to another question that we've got actually here, which is how can we use the findings from the research that you conducted to kind of embrace and open up access to, well, firstly, other economic paradigms and other social disciplines as well, social science disciplines, sorry.
Maybe if I can say something about this aspect. I'm currently working in a project, or my own project, on the way how academic careers are formed, especially among postdocs, so between PhD and professor position, which is the most important and the most decisive period in an academic career. And what I found was very interesting, that people are directed to a very one-sided way of publishing and doing research, and this is completely controlled by the rank of the journal which they want to publish or need to publish their papers. And they don't ask what is an important question. They ask what research topic can bring my paper to a top publication. And this is dysfunctional. This is extremely dysfunctional because it is destructive. It is destroying academics. It is destroying critical mind. It is destroying open debate. It is destroying free research. And it is just a pure number machine, a machine producing numbers. And if you do this we can say, oh, well, I do it just for one paper, then when I have my professor position, then I can do my research. But if you did it 10 years, then you can know how to make research in a different way, in a diversified way. And I think this is what economics should reflect, and economic sciences. It's different in management. It's different in marketing, for example, a completely different economic culture, my view. So accounting, finance, and economics is much more hierarchy oriented, and they are less hierarchy oriented. They are also more diversified. But this is what they need to think about. Who is controlling our practices? Are we the ones who control what we do? We as academics, as economists, or are other people indirectly controlling what we are doing via the construction of perception and so on, and the construction of symbolic visibilities? And this can only be solved within the economic sciences.
Well, thank you very much. Awesome. Okay, on to another question now, one that I missed previously, actually. So this person here is interested in how we interpret the Bourdieuian term field in the context of time. Yeah, thank you. Since economists show their influence in the social space, they were wondering if the book has any mentions on the influence within the temporal zone.
I can go with this one if you want. So Pierre Bourdieu actually developed quite a comprehensive analysis of our conceptual architecture of what he calls fields, actually. And he wrote many books about it. But basically, in every, what he calls social space, so space not necessarily in the sense of topographical or geographical space, but rather a relational space among individuals and institutions. So he says that there are three dimensions in every social space and in every field. So the first would be the volume of resources. The second would be the composition of resources. So for example, economic resources versus cultural resources. And actually the third dimension would be time, the evolution of the temporal evolution of fields. So in that sense, if we try to have a look at the historical evolution of a field, we would have to have different snapshots or continuous timeline on the institutions, how they evolve, etc. And so in the book, what we tried to do, at least in the chapter I co-authored, we had the professors in Switzerland between 1980 and 2000. So we had 20 years, which is not that much actually to study the historical evolution of a field, but we still were able to show that first, these external political and corporate logics were extremely stable across time. But what changed was between the 80s and the 2000s was the importance of scientific recognition, of more scientific credentials. And especially this was linked because of the increasing transnationalization of the discipline. So basically in the 70s, the discipline was at the lowest in terms of internationality. And so that means also that the very homogenized community of economists at the global level did not exist that much in the 70s. But now in 2020, basically, economists would teach the same topics in Switzerland or in, I don't know, in Malaysia or in Brazil or in South Africa or in the US. So there is kind of a transnationalization and homogenization. And that's something that we were trying to show a little bit, but on a short time period.
Great, thank you very much, Thierry. Okay, potentially one or two more questions then in that case. We've got one here asking if you've drawn on any critical realists or social oncologists, for instance, Tony Lawson or Margaret Archer, also on the notion of conventions. And I've got a second question actually. Do you have any views on the best ways of getting the orthodox community to see beyond the classic modeling disciplines and adopts other tools?
I was just writing a response to the second question, so I can also answer it now. So I think this is really challenging, the second question, because I'm convinced, and there are many studies showing that a paradigmatic change within economics and the pluralization of economics will be very difficult, especially because economics is really dominated by this mainstream and the whole way of how economic knowledge production is organized, but also evaluated, and how you can go ahead and make your career as an economist is really tightly connected to this mainstream paradigmatic organization of economics, and so I think there are network effects, there are the Matthew effects of those people who are already in the top positions, who are already in the top departments, are then also get the prizes and they get the recognition, they get the Nobel Prize, as Thierry has shown. So I think paradigmatic change won't come from inside, and all these reproduction structures really aggravate any kind of paradigmatic change in economics. And I think UK is really a great and alarming example for this, because the introduction of the research assessment exercise in UK really led to a further marginalization of heterodox approaches in Britain, because this inner logic of economics really is tied to this monoparadigmatic structure and to this relation to publishing in top 5, and therefore you have to be more or less mainstream. So I think change is only to come from outside, and concerning this aspect, I'm quite positive, because one thing is that economists really don't have any idea how to cope with socio-ecological transformation, with all these ecological issues. So there will be space and there will be need for alternative approaches, but I think it won't come from within the economics department, so to say, but maybe from political economics departments, from sociology, from economic sociology. So really challenging the mainstream, the paradigm or the mainstream from outside and not from inside economics.
Okay.
There is hope, I think.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Great. And maybe just the last one now then. Final question here.
Can I think
yes, Jens, you're already responding.
I think Mark's question is very important. Mark Falcon's question. Should I read it? Or so the majority of economists work outside academia in governments, regulators, NGOs, business, consulting, etc. Do the research conclusions apply to all economists? Yes and no. No, because most of what we have said here applies to academic economists. And these academic economists are, for example, in Stefan's example, often connected to via networks, for example, to think tanks. Yeah, and in think tanks, they also produce public available knowledge via different forms of communications. But many economists do not act in a public in a public way, somehow in a public way. They work as officers, they work as technicians, and so on. And these people have completely different problems. I think what we were talking about is about the way how the public images how academia and politics is basically related via specific public images of economists. And here it is, of course, the university has a very strong position, because the university can define who belongs to us as an economist and who's not. And this is a very, very, very powerful decision. And when you studied with a specific group of people, then you have to, and then you moved, for example, to an NGO or to a government and working there somewhere, then you need a training program to forget what you have learned in university. This is the main reason for doing this. I do also now research with economists from organizations and think tanks, and they have completely different way of knowledge production, independent of the belonging to the worker side, worker union side, or to the industrialist side. They agree that we have to solve problems, and these problems are defined by society, by reality, and we cannot talk about academic problems here. On the other hand, they have all studied economics in one way or another, so there is a specific thinking already there. And yeah, I think this is how I would respond to your question. But you are right; it is not one-to-one applicable to non-academic economists.
Okay, thank you very much, and with that, I think we will call things a day, as it's just gone past 8 in the UK. Guys, thank you so much for such an insightful and thought-provoking talk. I've very, very thoroughly enjoyed that. And to everybody listening still, I would vastly encourage you to go out and find a copy of that book. And I think you provided the link for where you can download it from. I'd very much encourage that. But yeah, thank you, Thierry, Jens, and Stefan. Such an incredible talk today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.